Hello to our viewers from across the state of Michigan. My name is Kathleen, and I'm a navigation specialist at the Autism Alliance of Michigan. Thank you for viewing this recorded resource as we work together to ensure COVID-19 vaccination is made accessible to individuals with autism spectrum disorder. My goal today is to review how autism spectrum disorder may present in the patients you serve and offer strategies for making vaccination less of a stressful experience for provider and patient alike. Let's begin with a quick review of autism spectrum disorder, otherwise known as ASD or simply autism. Autism spectrum disorder is characterized by social interaction difficulties, communication challenges, and a tendency to engage in rigid, repetitive behaviors. These symptoms are often present before the age of 3 and persist throughout the lifespan. It is not an illness, but rather a lifelong disability that impacts understanding and quality of life. Spectrum disorder means that it affects every individual differently, and the degree to which the symptoms affect each person varies greatly. Not everyone will experience symptoms with the same severity, but all people with ASD will have symptoms that affect social interactions and relationships. ASD does not necessarily have to include a cognitive impairment, as many individuals have average to above average intelligence, just as their typically developing peers. Specific characteristics can include a difficulty with spoken communication, difficulty with reciprocity or responding when addressed, understanding expectations, allowing appropriate social space. Eye contact may be avoided because it is uncomfortable or the individual is processing the words being exchanged. The individual may speak with a monotone or may not change their tone or manner of how they communicate with a peer to a different tone when speaking to a person with authority. The individual may also have a tendency to take sarcasm literally. There may be an inability to grasp what we perceive to be typical social cues, such as being mindful of personal space and knowing when to speak. Approximately 40% of individuals on the spectrum do not communicate verbally. Other forms of communication may be used, such as sign language, gestures, picture cards, or devices that speak, such as an iPad. Here are some specific recommendations and tools you may find helpful when engaging with an individual on the autism spectrum. Our goal is to make the patient feel as comfortable and supported as possible. For example, who are you? What is going to happen? Why? What will happen next? So, how can we best communicate this information to the patient we're serving? Social stories will be one of the most powerful proactive tools you will use. A social story gives an individual familiarity with an upcoming situation and helps to set expectations. Customizing the story for each new step in a process with new photos will be key. This story can be read to the individual multiple times prior to the event, in this case, getting a shot, in order to ease anxiety. Visuals are another great tool to use when creating new routines and setting expectations. For instance, a first-then board is made up of 2 columns of simple pictures that you reference while you are stating expectations. For example, first you will sit in your seat, and then you will get to go home. Now, I'll navigate us over to an example of a social story about the COVID-19 vaccine. The link to this resource will be shared at the end of the presentation for your use. This is a great example of something your vaccination site could potentially print out and laminate, thus making it available to your patients in the moment of their appointment. It's also an item you could download and save as a PDF and send to your patients prior to their appointment if you are aware of their autism diagnosis beforehand. So, when preparing to use a resource such as a social story, we must also consider behaviors that individuals with autism spectrum disorder may engage in, and that may impact our ability to successfully administer a vaccine. Remember that to the individual, behaviors such as the ones listed have a function. They may be calming to the individual, and they may be in response to an emotion. The person with autism may have difficulty verbalizing wants and needs, and may instead act out how they are feeling. So what can you do as a provider? We recommend you be patient, allow the individual time to get comfortable with you and time to process what is happening, and give the person time to respond after you make a request. Label and validate the individual's feelings and express your understanding. Give options and choices instead of open-ended questions. Slow down and stay calm. We recommend you get eye to eye or side by side with the individual. We recommend you briefly explain expectations. We recommend you explain what the individual can do and acknowledge strengths. Sometimes timers and visuals can also be beneficial. If an individual isn't understanding, use simplified and direct language. Use various types of visuals, as we've discussed. You can use simple gestures. You may use fill-in-the-blank statements. You may give options to put the person more in control of the situation. And of course, do not raise your voice. Sensory processing differences can also make new experiences challenging. Sensory processing difficulties occur when the individual's brain does not respond in the typical manner to the sensory input coming in. For instance, visual stimulation can be quite overwhelming, such as bright lights or flashing lights. Sounds can be very overwhelming, such as loud noises, screams, bells ringing, and the individual may be especially sensitive to whistles. Certain feelings of touch may be overwhelming, such as the feel of certain fabrics, a scratchy clothes tag, and knowing the difference between hot and cold. This may make shots especially overwhelming if the individual does not prefer to be touched. Certain foods may be preferred over others, and certain textures may be off-putting. Some smells can also trigger anxiety, like smoke or cleaning products. We especially want to be mindful of smells in the medical environment. Being able to attend to instructions can be difficult, given difficulty blocking out all other sensory inputs. For example, the sound of a fan is something most of us naturally block out. However, to a person on the spectrum, that fan may seem as loud as a police siren. Therefore, we want to minimize especially stimulating sounds, lights, and sensory experiences whenever possible. To put together everything we have discussed thus far, remember that the best approach for successful vaccination of persons on the autism spectrum is to create an accommodating environment whenever possible. Validate the person's feelings and concerns by using the most effective method of communication available. Put behaviors into a context so you may best understand why they may be occurring and how they can be minimized if needed. And provide items that may be soothing or comforting whenever possible, such as fidget spinners, stress balls, stuffed animals, or iPad games. We also recommend that you have a separate check-in process for people on the autism spectrum to minimize wait times. Here is a list of specific examples we think you may be able to consider implementing at your vaccination site. For instance, identify a point of contact within your vaccination clinic to address reasonable accommodation needs, both prior to and during appointments for individuals on the autism spectrum. Ask the caregiver what is helpful, how best to communicate, and what barriers you may anticipate. Who will the patient be with, if anyone? What accommodations do they desire? Do they have preferred items? Would they like a private room? How do you plan to communicate with the individual directly? Do we have a flexible time frame in case the appointment runs long? Many of these items are strategies your site and team can consider and plan for long before a patient with ASD appears for their shot. Here are additional specific ideas for your reference as you move forward with your site's logistical planning and potential sensory item acquisition. Amazon has many items for sale that would be appropriate for a medical office setting and may easily be sanitized after each use. Here is an example of a 39-pack of fidget toys. As you can see, some of them may be more appropriate for the office setting than others. The silicone stretchy strings are probably a little more difficult to sanitize than, say, a Rubik's Cube. Also, comfortable noise-canceling earmuffs may be especially helpful for those who are overwhelmed easily by sensory input, such as loud noises. Something like this is an excellent example. Here, we have a list of relevant links and resources for your reference, which I will share with you now. The first one is guidance for vaccinating older adults and people with disabilities, specifically made for vaccination site. This may be a good resource to print out for the staff members at your vaccination site. The second one is a personal profile sheet that your patient may fill out prior to or during an appointment. It gives you specific insight into the accommodations that may be requested for this person to best receive a COVID-19 vaccine. The third item is a list of how to best prepare, attend, and follow up for a COVID-19 vaccine appointment. This resource can be shared with your patients on the autism spectrum before or during the appointment. The fourth link is the social story we referenced previously. Again, this is an excellent resource to potentially print out and keep available at your vaccine site. That way you may walk the individual through each step as you complete the process. And lastly, this is the document of guidelines and best practices for accessibility at Michigan vaccination sites, complements of the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. Here are additional resources for you and your team to consider moving forward. What's possible at your specific location to make individuals on the autism spectrum more supported and understood throughout the vaccination process? We've included here a list of links for your reference, but this is by no means an exhaustive list of what all is currently available. Please reach out to us if you have any specific ideas, and we will assist you in finding relevant resources. If you, your clientele, or patient families reside in Michigan, please refer them to the Autism Alliance of Michigan for any autism-related services or support you or they may need. Our Navigator team can answer your call Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., and you are, of course, always welcome to leave a voicemail. We can also be reached by email using the email address on your screen. Thank you for your participation in this presentation and for all you do to serve the autism population during this especially challenging time. We're here to help however possible.